The telegram from Boston arrived on a Tuesday morning in August 1884, bearing news that would shatter Olivia Osborne's carefully constructed world into pieces smaller than the dust motes dancing in the Kansas sunlight. Her father was dead. Her mother had passed 3 years prior, and the small inheritance she had counted on to sustain her modest lifestyle as a bookshop clerk had been consumed by debts she never knew existed. At 23 years old, with nothing but a trunk of belongings and a head full of romantic novels, Olivia found herself on a westbound train with a single address clutched in her gloved hand, the name of a distant aunt in Wilson, Kansas, who might, if fortune smiled even slightly, offer her refuge. The journey west stripped away her illusions 1 mile at a time. The comfortable cities gave way to rough towns, which gave way to settlements that barely deserved the name, until finally the train deposited her in Wilson with a screech of brakes and a cloud of prairie dust that coated her navy traveling dress. Olivia stepped onto the platform with her trunk, looking at a town that seemed pulled from the pages of a dime novel, all wooden storefronts and dirt streets, horses tied to hitching posts and men in wide-brimmed hats who stared at her with undisguised curiosity. She felt as out of place as a rose in a cactus patch. The address led her to a small boarding house on the edge of town, where she learned that her Aunt Margaret had died 6 months earlier. The landlady, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Henderson, looked Olivia up and down with the assessing gaze of someone calculating worth down to the penny. "Your aunt left owing 2 months' rent," Mrs. Henderson said flatly. "You planning to settle her debts?" Olivia's fingers tightened on her reticule, feeling the pitiful weight of the coins inside. "I have very little money. I was hoping to find work." Mrs. Henderson's laugh was short and bitter. "Work? Doing what?" "We have got a saloon that is always looking for girls, but you do not strike me as the type. Maybe the hotel needs a maid, though they pay near nothing. This is not Boston, miss. Women out here work hard or they marry, and sometimes both." The words stung because they were true. Olivia had spent her life surrounded by books, by stories of grand adventures and sweeping romances, by heroines who faced adversity with grace and always found their happy ending by the final page. But standing in that cramped boarding house parlor with its faded wallpaper and worn furniture, she realized that life was not a story. There was no author guiding her toward a satisfying conclusion, no hero waiting to sweep her off her feet. There was only the harsh reality of survival in a place that cared nothing for her education or her dreams. She took a room for a week, paying nearly half of what she had left, and spent the next 3 days walking the dusty streets of Wilson in search of work. The hotel did need a maid, but when they learned she had no experience with the heavy labor required, they turned her away. The general store had no positions. The small schoolhouse already had a teacher. By the 4th day, with her money dwindling to almost nothing, Olivia sat on a bench outside the train station and allowed herself, for the first time since leaving Boston, to cry. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and gentle, colored with a drawl she had only heard in passing since arriving in Kansas. Olivia looked up through her tears to see a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned face, held genuine concern. He wore dusty work clothes, a red bandana around his neck, and had the look of a man who spent his days outdoors. "I am fine," Olivia lied, dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "Just a difficult moment." "You are staying at Henderson's boarding house," he said, and when she looked surprised, he offered a small smile. "Wilson is not big. Word travels. You are Margaret Colby's niece from back east." I was. I mean, I am her niece, but I am discovering she is not here, and I am not certain what I am supposed to do now. The man shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her distress but unwilling to simply walk away. Name is Grant Brennan. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles west of town. Your aunt was a good woman. She used to do mending for some of the ranch hands, always fair-priced and good work. I was sorry to hear of her passing. Olivia Osborne, she said, managing a weak smile. It seems she and I were both unfortunate in our circumstances. Grant turned his hat in his hands, the brim rotating through his calloused fingers. You looking for work? Desperately, though I am learning I have no skills that seem valuable here. I can read and write. I know literature and poetry. I can do basic arithmetic and keep ledgers. But no one needs such things. My foreman's wife just took ill, Grant said slowly, as if the words were forming as he spoke. Nothing serious, the doctor says, but she needs bed rest for at least 6 weeks, maybe more. She usually handles the books for the ranch, makes sure the hands get paid proper, keeps track of supplies and such. It is not glamorous work and the ranch is not fancy, but if you can truly keep ledgers and do arithmetic, I could use the help. Pay would be $20 a month plus room and board in the main house. Olivia stared at him, certain she had misheard. $20 was more than she had made in 2 months at the Boston bookshop. Room and board meant she would not have to worry about Mrs. Henderson's rent. It seemed too good to be true, which made her immediately suspicious. She had read enough novels to know that offers that seemed perfect often came with catches. Why would you offer this to a complete stranger? She asked carefully. Grant met her eyes directly. Because you are in need and I am in need, and that seems like reason enough. Because your aunt was kind to my men when they needed it, and I figure I can return the favor through you. And because you got an honest face, Miss Osborne, and I generally trust my instincts about people. He paused. But if you would rather not, I understand. It is a fair piece out of town, and you would be living among cowboys and horses. It is not refined. Every practical bone in her body screamed at her to accept. And yet the romantic part of her, the part raised on novels where noble gestures often masked sinister intentions, hesitated. She searched Grant Brennan's face, looking for signs of deception, but found only patience and a quiet kindness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. I would need to collect my things from the boarding house, she heard herself say. I have a wagon. I can take you now if you are decided. She was decided because she had no other choice, because life had stripped away her options and left her with this one unlikely lifeline extended by a cowboy with kind eyes and calloused hands. Yes, she said. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Just Grant, he said, settling his hat back on his head. Out here, we do not stand much on formality. The ride to the Brennan ranch took nearly an hour, and Olivia spent most of it holding tight to the wagon seat as they bounced along a rutted road that cut through endless prairie. Grant pointed out landmarks, a creek where antelope came to drink, a distant line of trees that marked the property boundary, a rock formation that looked like a crouching bear if you squinted right. He spoke easily, without the awkward silences she expected, telling her about the ranch, about the 20 hands he employed, about the horses they bred and sold throughout Kansas and into Colorado. It was my father's place, he explained as they crested a hill, and the ranch spread out below them. He started with nothing but grit and a good eye for horses, built it up slow and steady. When he passed 2 years back, it came to me. My older brother had no interest in ranching. He is a lawyer in Topeka now. The ranch was larger than Olivia expected, a sprawling collection of buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was 2 stories, painted white with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Barns and corrals spread out behind it, and she could see horses moving in the enclosures, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. Men worked throughout the yard, some leading horses, others carrying equipment, all moving with the purposeful efficiency of people who knew their jobs well. Grant pulled the wagon up to the main house and helped Olivia down, his hand steadying her elbow with careful propriety. A woman emerged from the house, middle-aged and sturdy, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "This is Sarah Miller," Grant said. "She cooks for the house and keeps things running smooth. Sarah, this is Miss Olivia Osborne. She will be helping with the books while Martha is recovering." Sarah looked Olivia over with the same assessing gaze every woman in Wilson seemed to possess, but her expression softened quickly. "Welcome, miss. You look done in from the journey. Let me show you to your room, and I will bring up some water so you can wash before supper." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a simple quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the prairie stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was more than Olivia had hoped for, and as she sat on the edge of the bed after Sarah left, she felt the first small flutter of something that might, eventually, become hope. Grant gave her 3 days to settle in before asking her to start work. She spent that time exploring the ranch, learning the rhythms of the place, watching the cowboys work with a fascination she had not expected to feel. They were rough men, weathered by sun and hard labor, but there was a camaraderie among them that reminded her of the heroes in the Western dime novels she had always dismissed as unrealistic. They joked and teased, worked together with practiced ease, and treated her with a courtesy that was surprisingly genuine. Grant himself was often busy, riding out early to check on the herds or working in the corrals breaking new horses. But Olivia found herself watching for him throughout the day, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way his voice carried when he called instructions to the men, the way he always seemed to have time to answer her questions about the ranch operations with patience and thoroughness. When she finally sat down with the ranch ledgers, she discovered they were in worse shape than Grant had let on. Martha, the foreman's wife, had done her best, but she was not trained in bookkeeping, and there were errors and omissions scattered throughout. Bills had been paid twice or not at all, supplies were unaccounted for, and the pay records for the hands were a confusing mess of scratched-out numbers and margin notes. Olivia spent 2 full days sorting through the chaos, creating new ledgers with clean columns and careful notations. She tracked down receipts, verified payments with the hands, and slowly built a clear picture of the ranch's finances. When she was finally satisfied, she asked Grant to review her work. He sat at the desk in his study, a room lined with books that surprised her, and went through her ledgers page by page. She stood nearby, nervous despite herself, watching his face for any sign of disapproval. When he finally looked up, his expression was one of genuine amazement. "Miss Osborne, this is remarkable. I can actually understand what is happening with the money now. Martha did her best, bless her, but this is proper bookkeeping." "There were some discrepancies," Olivia admitted. "You were owed money from 3 different buyers who had not paid in full. I prepared letters for you to send, and you have been overpaying for grain from the Wilson supplier. I found a distributor in Junction City who can provide the same quality for 15% less." Grant leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You have been here less than a week and you have already saved me money. I knew hiring you was a good idea, but I did not realize how good." The praise warmed her more than it should have. "I am only doing what you hired me to do." "No," he said, standing and moving to the bookshelf. He pulled down a worn volume and handed it to her. "You are doing more than I hoped for. This is worth celebrating. Do you read Dickens?" She looked at the book in her hands, a copy of Great Expectations with a cracked spine that spoke of many readings. "I love Dickens." "Then borrow it if you like. I have got a fair collection. Not many people out here to discuss books with, but I always loved reading. My mother insisted on it, said a man's mind needed exercising as much as his body." It was such an unexpected revelation that Olivia found herself staring at him. This cowboy who broke horses and ran a ranch also read Dickens and valued education. He seemed to contain contradictions, rough and refined, practical and thoughtful, and she realized she wanted to understand him better. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Olivia worked in the study each morning, managing the books and correspondence. In the afternoons, she often sat on the porch with her own books, watching the ranch operations with growing interest. And in the evenings after supper, she and Grant began spending time talking, first about books, then about their lives, their histories, their thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. She learned that Grant was 28, that he had grown up on the ranch and loved it with a fierceness that bordered on devotion. His mother had died when he was 16, and he had helped his father build the ranch into what it was today. He had been engaged once, to a girl from Salina, but she had not wanted the isolation of ranch life and had ended things 2 years ago. He spoke of it without bitterness, simply as something that had happened, and Olivia admired his acceptance. In turn, she told him about Boston, about her parents, about the bookshop where she had worked and the small apartment she had shared with 2 other women. She told him about the novels she loved, the stories that had shaped her understanding of the world, and how she was learning that reality was both harsher and more complex than any fiction. "You talk about stories like they disappointed you," Grant observed one evening. They were sitting on the porch as the sun set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "But seems to me that stories do not have to be exactly true to teach us things." "What could they possibly teach that applies out here?" Olivia asked, gesturing to the endless expanse of land. "In novels, love conquers all, heroes always win, and virtue is always rewarded, but real life is not so neat." "Maybe not," Grant agreed. "But stories remind us what is possible. They show us how people can be, even if they are not always that way. I reckon that is worth something." She looked at him in the fading light, at his profile silhouetted against the sunset, and felt something shift in her chest. He was not the hero from her novels, not some perfect idealized figure. He was better because he was real, flawed, and thoughtful and kind in ways that felt earned rather than ordained by an author's pen. "You are an unusual cowboy, Grant Brennan," she said softly. He turned to meet her eyes, and she saw warmth there that made her breath catch. "And you are an unusual bookkeeper, Olivia Osborne." The first frost came in late October, and with it, a problem that threatened the ranch's stability. A buyer in Colorado who had contracted for 20 horses suddenly backed out, claiming financial difficulties. Grant had already invested significant resources in preparing the animals, and losing the sale would cost him thousands of dollars he could not afford to lose. Olivia watched him wrestle with the problem for 3 days, saw the worry lines deepen around his eyes, the way he spent long hours staring at the ledgers as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into a solution. Finally, she made a suggestion. "What if we found multiple buyers instead of one large contract? Smaller ranches or individual buyers who need quality horses but cannot afford to purchase in large quantities. We could advertise in newspapers across Kansas and into Nebraska and Missouri." Grant looked up from the desk, exhaustion evident in his face. That would take time, and time is something I do not have much of. Feed costs money, and winter is coming. Then let me help. I can write the advertisements, send letters to every town within a 3-day ride. We can offer delivery, include testimonials from previous buyers. If we price them right, we can make up the lost sale and potentially find new long-term customers. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. You really believe this could work? I do. You have the best horses in this part of Kansas. People just need to know about them. What followed was 2 weeks of intense work. Olivia wrote advertisements that balanced practical information with just enough narrative flair to capture attention. She sent letters to livestock agents, to ranchers, to anyone who might need quality horses. She organized the responses, negotiating prices and delivery terms with a confidence that surprised even herself. Grant worked alongside her, providing technical details about the horses, helping draft responses, and slowly, incredibly, buyers began to emerge. By mid-November, they had sold 17 of the 20 horses to 7 different buyers across 3 states, at prices that actually exceeded what the original Colorado contract would have paid. The day the final sale was confirmed, Grant stood in the study doorway watching Olivia file the paperwork, and when she looked up, she found him smiling with an expression that was equal parts relief and something deeper. "You saved the ranch," he said simply. "We saved it," she corrected. "I just handled the letters." He crossed the room in 3 strides, and before she fully understood what was happening, pulled her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the floor. "You are remarkable, absolutely remarkable." Her arms wrapped around his neck instinctively, and for a moment they stood there, holding each other in the quiet study with the afternoon light streaming through the windows. When he set her down, his hands lingered on her waist, and she found she did not want him to let go. "Olivia," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, the door burst open and one of the ranch hands, a young man named Tommy, rushed in. "Boss, there is trouble in the south pasture. That mountain lion is back, and it got one of the mares." Grant's expression shifted instantly from tender to focused. He grabbed his rifle from the rack by the door and turned to Olivia. "Stay in the house. I will be back as soon as I can." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her standing in the study with her heart pounding and words unspoken hanging in the air between where they had stood. The mountain lion hunt took 2 days. Olivia spent that time in a state of anxious worry she had not expected to feel. Sarah tried to reassure her that Grant knew what he was doing, that he had dealt with predators before, but Olivia could not shake the fear that something might happen to him. She realized, sitting in the study surrounded by the ledgers they had worked on together, that somewhere in the past months she had fallen in love with him. It was not the dramatic, instantaneous love of her novels. There had been no moment where lightning struck and everything changed. Instead, it had grown slowly, built from conversations and shared work, from watching him interact with his men with fairness and respect, from the way he listened when she spoke and valued her opinions, from the quiet kindness he showed in 100 small ways. He had not swept her off her feet with grand gestures. He had simply been himself, and that was enough. When Grant finally returned, dirty and exhausted but unharmed, Olivia met him on the porch. She had been watching from the window and had seen the riders approach in the fading evening light. He dismounted slowly, moving like a man who had spent too long in the saddle, and looked up to find her waiting. "We got it," he said. "The lion will not trouble the herd anymore. You are all right." She could not keep the worry from her voice, just tired. He climbed the porch steps, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, she could see the weariness in his eyes, but also something else, something that made her heart race. Olivia, about what I was saying before. You do not have to say anything, she interrupted, suddenly afraid of what might come next, of how vulnerable she had become. But I do. He took her hands in his, rough calluses against her softer skin. These past months with you here, they have been the best I can remember. At first, I told myself it was just nice to have help with the books, to have someone to talk to about things beyond cattle and horses. But that was not it, or not all of it. The truth is, I have fallen in love with you, Olivia Osborne. Completely, thoroughly, inconveniently in love with you, and I cannot keep pretending otherwise. Her breath caught in her throat. Inconveniently. Because you are educated and refined, because you came from a world of culture and books, and I have nothing to offer you but a ranch in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and a life that is sometimes hard and often lonely. Because I have no right to ask you to stay when you could go back east, find a position in a city, have the life you were meant for. The life I was meant for. Olivia felt something fierce rise in her chest. Grant, the life I was meant for disappeared when my father died. I came here with nothing, expecting nothing, and you gave me a chance when no one else would. You treated me with respect and kindness. You made me feel valued for my mind, not despite it. You showed me that life out here is not the barbaric existence I imagined, but something real and worthwhile. And somewhere in all of that, I fell in love with you too. His eyes widened. You did. I did. I do. Even though it makes no logical sense, even though we barely know each other by Eastern standards, even though this is not at all how it happens in novels. I love you, and I cannot imagine being anywhere else but here. Grant pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her face with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. Then I am asking you, proper and formal, would you consider marrying me? Would you stay here, not as my bookkeeper, but as my wife? Help me run this ranch, build a life with me, take a chance on this cowboy who reads too much Dickens. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the chaste embraces described in her novels. It was warm and real and tasted like dust and horses, and the beginning of everything she had not known she wanted. And standing there on the porch with the prairie wind whispering around them and the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, Olivia understood that fairy tales did not require fairy godmothers or magic spells. Sometimes they just required two people brave enough to take a chance on each other. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wilson. Olivia wore a dress that Sarah helped her make, ivory silk trimmed with lace that had belonged to Grant's mother. Grant wore his best suit, looking both uncomfortable and handsome, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. The ranch hands all attended, along with what seemed like half the town, and afterward, there was a celebration at the ranch with food and music that lasted well into the night. Their wedding night was spent in the main house, in Grant's room that was now their room, and Olivia discovered that the reality of physical intimacy was both more awkward and more wonderful than novels had led her to believe. Grant was patient and gentle, taking time to help her feel comfortable, and when they finally came together, it felt like the natural culmination of everything that had been building between them for months. In the days that followed, Olivia settled into her new role as Grant's wife with a contentment that surprised her. She continued managing the ranch books because she enjoyed it, and because Grant valued her input on business decisions. But she also learned other aspects of ranch life, helping Sarah with preserving food for winter, learning to ride horses with Grant's patient instruction, and beginning to understand the rhythms of the seasons and the land. Winter came hard that year, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. But Olivia found she did not mind the isolation. The main house was warm and comfortable, and she spent the long evenings reading by the fire with Grant, discussing books and plans for the ranch, learning the small intimacies of married life. He told her stories of growing up on the prairie, of his father's determination to build something lasting, of the hard lessons learned through drought and disease and economic downturns. She told him about her childhood in Boston, about her dreams of becoming a writer someday, about the fear and uncertainty that had brought her west. "You should write," Grant said one snowy evening in January. "You have got a way with words. Those advertisements you wrote brought in buyers because they told a story people wanted to be part of." "Stories about horses are hardly literature," Olivia protested. "Maybe not, but they are a start. And anyway, who says you cannot write about this?" He gestured around them. "About the West, about people building lives out here. Lord knows there are enough stories in Wilson alone to fill a dozen books." The idea took root in her mind, and slowly, tentatively, she began writing in the evenings. Not novels, not yet, but sketches and observations, character studies of the ranch hands and townspeople, descriptions of the prairie in different seasons. Grant read everything she showed him, offering encouragement and honest feedback, and Olivia felt a creative spark ignite that she had not known was dormant. Spring arrived with a rush of green across the prairie and the birth of new foals. Olivia spent hours watching the gangly-legged youngsters explore their world with clumsy enthusiasm, and she felt a pang of longing that surprised her with its intensity. She and Grant had not discussed children beyond vague references to someday. But as she watched him work with the young horses, patient and firm and infinitely gentle, she found herself imagining him as a father. That night, lying in their bed with Grant's arm around her, she broached the subject carefully. "Do you want children?" She felt him shift, propping himself on one elbow to look down at her in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I do, yes, but only if you do. I know it is a risk, especially out here without big city doctors close by." "I want them too," she admitted. "I have been thinking about it more and more. A family, children growing up on the ranch, learning to ride and read and be part of this life we are building." Grant smiled, that slow, genuine smile that always made her heart skip. "Then I reckon we should work on that." They did, with an enthusiasm that made them both laugh, and by summer, Olivia's suspicions were confirmed. She was pregnant, and the news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror that Grant seemed to instinctively understand. He became even more protective, fretting when she lifted anything heavy, insisting she rest more even as she rolled her eyes at his concern. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Olivia continued her work on the books, though Grant gradually took over more of her physical tasks around the ranch. She wrote more during this time, finding that her changing body and the new life growing inside her sparked a creativity she had not experienced before. She began a novel, a story about a woman from the East who finds unexpected love and purpose in the West. It was loosely based on her own experience, but embellished and expanded, and she found herself lost in it for hours at a time. In late October, as the leaves turned gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Olivia went into labor. It was a long, difficult ordeal that lasted through the night and into the next day. Grant stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement even as his own face grew pale with worry. Sarah and the doctor Grant had brought from Junction City attended to the medical necessities, but it was Grant's presence that gave Olivia the strength to keep going when the pain seemed unbearable. Finally, in the early afternoon, their son was born. He came into the world red-faced and screaming, healthy and strong, and when the doctor placed him in Olivia's arms, she wept with relief and joy. Grant knelt beside the bed, staring at their child with an expression of awe that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "He is perfect," Grant whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James after Grant's father, and he became the center of their world. Grant proved to be as patient and gentle a father as Olivia had imagined, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, playing with him for hours, teaching him to smile and laugh. Watching them together, Olivia felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened her. The first years of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries. He grew from infant to toddler, developing a personality that was curious and determined, traits he clearly inherited from both parents. He loved the horses and would cry to be taken to the corrals, and Grant built him a small rocking horse that became his favorite possession. Olivia completed her novel when James was 2 years old. It had taken longer than expected, written in stolen moments between motherhood and ranch management. But when she finally wrote the last page, she felt a sense of accomplishment that rivaled anything else in her life. Grant read it over the course of 3 evenings, and when he finished, he looked at her with pride shining in his eyes. "This is really good, Olivia. I mean truly good. You should try to get it published." Published? The idea seemed impossible. I would not know where to start. "Then we will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else." He helped her research publishers, and together they prepared a manuscript and letters of inquiry. Olivia sent her novel to 6 different publishers, expecting rejection but needing to try. And then she waited, focusing on James and the ranch and trying not to obsess over the responses that might or might not come. The first rejection arrived 6 weeks later, polite but firm. The second came a month after that. But then, in the spring of 1888, a letter arrived from a publisher in New York. They wanted to publish her novel. They loved the authentic voice, the realistic portrayal of Western life, the romance that felt earned rather than contrived. They offered her a modest advance and discussed plans for publication the following year. Olivia stood in the study holding the letter, reading it over and over, certain she must be misunderstanding. Grant came in to find her crying, and when she showed him the letter, he swept her into his arms and spun her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "I told you," he said, setting her down and framing her face with his hands. "I told you that you had talent. I am so proud of you, Olivia. So incredibly proud. I could not have done it without you," she said, and it was true. He had believed in her when she had not believed in herself, had encouraged her to pursue a dream she had thought impossible. The novel was published in the spring of 1889 and received modest but positive reviews. It did not become a bestseller, but it sold respectably, and the publisher asked if she was working on another. Olivia was. Another story set in Kansas, about a schoolteacher and a sheriff who solve a series of mysterious thefts while falling in love. Writing had become part of her life, as essential as breathing, and she loved that she could pursue it while still being a wife and mother and active partner in the ranch. As James grew older, they discovered Olivia was pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine, was born in the summer of 1890. She had Grant's blue eyes and Olivia's dark hair, and her temperament was calmer than her brother's had been. James, now 4, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping with everything from feeding to diaper changes, though his help often created more work than it saved. The ranch continued to prosper. Grant's reputation for quality horses spread, and they found themselves with more business than they could handle. They hired additional hands and expanded the breeding program, investing in bloodlines that commanded premium prices. Olivia managed the business side with skill, negotiating contracts and managing finances. And together, she and Grant built the ranch into one of the most successful operations in central Kansas. Life was not always easy. There were hard seasons when drought threatened the herds, economic downturns that forced them to make difficult decisions, illnesses and injuries that reminded them how fragile everything was. James had a terrifying bout with fever when he was 6 that left them both sleepless for days, praying and tending to him until the fever finally broke. One of Grant's closest friends, a fellow rancher, died in a riding accident, and they attended the funeral with heavy hearts, reminded of how quickly things could change. But through it all, they faced challenges together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating victories as a team. Their love, which had started as an unexpected spark in a desperate time, had grown into something deep and unshakable. It was not the dramatic passion of novels, but something steadier and more real, built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Grant surprised Olivia with a trip to St. Louis. It was the first time she had been in a large city since leaving Boston, and while she enjoyed the theaters and restaurants, she found herself missing the ranch. The city that had once seemed the pinnacle of civilization now felt crowded and loud, and she was genuinely happy to return home to the prairie and the life they had built. "I never thought I would prefer Kansas to a city," she told Grant as their train approached Wilson. "But I do. This is home now, truly home." He squeezed her hand, understanding in his eyes. "You know what amazes me? You came here with nothing, expecting nothing, and you built a life that is richer than most people ever dream of. You became a published author, a successful businesswoman, a wonderful mother. You proved that those stories you loved were right about one thing. What is that? That ordinary people can have extraordinary lives if they are brave enough to reach for them." Their children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. James proved to be a natural horseman like his father, spending every free moment in the corrals and pastures, learning the business from the ground up. Catherine was quieter but no less determined, with a sharp mind for numbers that reminded everyone of her mother. She would sit in the study with Olivia, asking questions about the ledgers and how the business worked, soaking up information like a sponge. Olivia continued writing, publishing 4 more novels over the next decade. None achieved spectacular commercial success, but they sold steadily and earned positive reviews. More importantly, they gave her a creative outlet and a sense of identity beyond wife and mother, though she cherished those roles deeply. She wrote about the West with authenticity and affection, creating characters who felt real and stories that resonated with readers who wanted to understand life beyond the cities. Grant's hair began to gray at his temples, which Olivia found incredibly attractive, though she teased him about becoming distinguished. Her own appearance changed too, lines appearing at the corners of her eyes from squinting against the prairie sun, her hands becoming rougher from work despite her efforts. But when Grant looked at her, she could still see the same warmth and desire that had been there from the beginning, and she knew he felt the same about her. In 1899, James announced at age 13 that he wanted to be a rancher like his father, and the pride in Grant's face was unmistakable. They began including him more actively in ranch decisions, teaching him not just the physical work but the business aspects as well. Catherine, at 9, declared that she wanted to be a writer and a businesswoman, and she began her own stories, showing them to Olivia with nervous hope. The new century arrived with celebration and reflection. On New Year's Eve 1900, Olivia and Grant stood on their porch watching the sky, their children asleep inside, and contemplated everything that had changed since that day in 1884 when a desperate woman and a kind cowboy had met in Wilson. "Did you ever imagine this?" Olivia asked, leaning against Grant's shoulder. "When you offered me that job, did you have any idea where it would lead?" "Not this specifically," Grant admitted. "But I knew there was something special about you from the moment I saw you crying on that bench. I just knew I wanted to help, and everything else followed from that. You changed my life completely. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. You did the same for me. This ranch was successful before you came, but it was just work. You made it a home. You made it mean something beyond profit and horses. You gave me family and love and purpose I had not realized was missing." They kissed there under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from unlikely beginnings. The new century stretched before them full of possibility, and they faced it together as they had faced everything else, with love and determination and unwavering partnership. James took over more ranch responsibilities as he grew into young manhood, proving himself capable and trustworthy. He had Grant's calm demeanor and Olivia's strategic mind, a combination that served him well. At 19, he began courting a young woman from Wilson, the daughter of the general store owner, and Olivia watched him fall in love with the same mixture of joy and melancholy all parents feel when their children grow up. Catherine showed early promise as a writer, crafting stories that displayed surprising depth for someone so young. Olivia worked with her, teaching her the craft, encouraging her creativity while also ensuring she understood the practical side of writing as a profession. At 15, Catherine submitted her first story to a magazine and received her first rejection, which devastated her, until Olivia showed her the box of rejection letters she had saved from her own early attempts. "Every writer faces rejection," Olivia explained. "It is not about never failing. It is about learning from failure and trying again." Catherine absorbed the lesson and kept writing, developing a resilience that would serve her well throughout her life. In 1905, Grant suffered a serious injury when a spooked horse threw him during a thunderstorm. He broke his leg badly, and for a time, the doctors worried he might not recover full use of it. Olivia nursed him through those difficult months, managing the ranch with James's help while Grant was bedridden. It was a role reversal that frustrated Grant enormously, but it also reminded them both of how much they relied on each other. "I hate being useless," Grant grumbled one afternoon as Olivia changed the dressing on his leg. "You are not useless. You are healing, which is different. And besides, you have spent 20 years taking care of me. Let me take care of you for once." His leg healed, though it left him with a slight limp that became more pronounced when the weather changed. But he returned to work with characteristic determination, and life resumed its patterns. James married his sweetheart, Ruth, in 1906, and they moved into a house Grant built for them on the eastern section of the ranch property. Ruth was a practical, kind woman who fit seamlessly into ranch life, and when she became pregnant within the year, Olivia found herself contemplating grandmotherhood with anticipation and wonder. Their first grandchild, a boy they named Grant after his grandfather, was born in the spring of 1907. Holding him for the first time, Olivia felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both profound and deeply satisfying. She looked at Grant across the room, saw his eyes bright with emotion, and knew he felt the same. Catherine, at 17, received acceptance to a women's college in Kansas City with a program in literature and writing. It was a bittersweet moment for Olivia, proud of her daughter's accomplishments, but sad to see her leave home. Grant, ever practical, reminded her that Kansas City was only a day's train ride away. "She will come back," he said with confidence. "The ranch is in her blood, just like it is in James's. She will go, she will learn and grow, but she will come back." He was right. Catherine thrived at college, but she returned every summer and holiday, always eager to get back to the ranch and the family. She graduated in 1910 with honors and returned permanently, announcing her intention to write seriously while helping manage the ranch business. She had developed confidence and poise during her college years, and Olivia delighted in seeing the woman her daughter had become. The ranch continued to evolve. They added cattle to their horse operation, diversifying their income. James proved to be an innovative manager, implementing new breeding techniques and business practices that increased profitability. Catherine took over much of the bookkeeping, freeing Olivia to focus more on her writing, and between them, they made the ranch more successful than ever. Olivia's novels had developed a loyal readership over the years, and her sixth book, published in 1911, became her most successful yet. It told the story of a woman building a life in Kansas, and readers responded to its authenticity and heart. The advance was substantial enough that Olivia suggested they finally build that library addition to the house that Grant had been talking about for years. The library became her sanctuary, a room lined with shelves holding her beloved books, with a large desk where she wrote, and a comfortable seating area where the family gathered in the evenings. It was completed just before her 50th birthday, and Grant threw her a party that included friends and family from across Kansas. Standing in the crowded room, surrounded by people she loved, Olivia reflected on how impossible this life would have seemed to her younger self. More grandchildren came, 3 more from James and Ruth, 2 boys and a girl. Catherine married at 25 to a lawyer from Salina named Edward Whitman, a thoughtful man who loved literature as much as she did and who understood her need to write. They built a house in Wilson, allowing Catherine to remain close to the ranch while giving them independence. Their children, a daughter and then twin boys, added to the growing family. The years brought their share of sorrows too. Sarah Miller, who had been with them from the beginning, passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1914. Her funeral was attended by half the county, a testament to how loved she had been. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, died a year later, and Olivia found herself attending the funeral of a woman she had once feared, feeling an unexpected sympathy for her hard life. World War I touched even remote Kansas. Several of the ranch hands enlisted, and the family followed news from Europe with growing anxiety. James was too old to be drafted, which relieved everyone, but they knew families who lost sons, and the grief was real even at a distance. They supported the war effort through bond purchases and donation drives, feeling helpless so far from the fighting. Through it all, Olivia and Grant remained the foundation of their growing family. They were in their 50s now, no longer young, but their love had only deepened with time. They still sat on the porch most evenings, talking about the day, making plans, discussing books. They still reached for each other in the night, their physical relationship having evolved but not diminished with age. They still laughed together, still challenged each other intellectually, still functioned as true partners in every aspect of their lives. In 1920, on their 35th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration at the ranch. It was a beautiful autumn day, warm and golden, and the yard filled with family and friends. A photographer took formal portraits, capturing 3 generations of Brennans gathered on the porch. Looking at the assembled crowd, Olivia felt overwhelmed by the reality of what she and Grant had created. When she said as much to him later that night, he pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "We created it together. That is the important part. None of this would exist if you had not been brave enough to get on that train west, if you had not been willing to take a chance on a cowboy offering you a job, if you had not let yourself fall in love even when it was not what you expected." "I used to think love was only in stories," Olivia said softly. "I thought real life was too messy and difficult for the kind of happy endings I read about. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that fairy tales can come true, just not in the way I imagined." "This is better than a fairy tale," Grant said firmly, "because it is real. We worked for this, fought for it, built it with our own hands and hearts. That makes it more valuable than any story because it is ours." The 1920s brought prosperity and change. The ranch thrived, now managed primarily by James with input from Grant, who had gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, though he remained actively involved. Catherine published her 3rd novel to excellent reviews, establishing herself as a respected author in her own right. The grandchildren grew, each developing their own paths and dreams. Grant's health began to decline in his late 60s, nothing dramatic, just the accumulated wear of a lifetime of hard physical work. His limp became more pronounced, and he tired more easily. Olivia, ever attentive, adjusted their routines to accommodate his limitations without making him feel diminished. They spent more time reading, talking, reminiscing, savoring the life they had built together. In the summer of 1928, they took a trip to Boston. It was Olivia's first return since 1884, and the changes were staggering. The city had grown enormously, electrified and modernized beyond recognition. They visited the street where her old bookshop had been, now replaced by a department store. They saw sights she remembered from her youth, now transformed by time and progress. "Do you miss it?" Grant asked as they stood looking at the house where she had grown up, now divided into apartments. "No," Olivia said without hesitation. "This is history for me, but it is not home. Home is Kansas, the ranch, our family. That life I had here, that girl I was, she feels like a stranger now." Back in Wilson, they settled into a peaceful routine. Grant spent his days with the horses he still loved, moving slower but no less knowledgeable. Olivia wrote in the mornings and spent afternoons with grandchildren, teaching them to read and encouraging their creativity. Evenings were for each other, for conversations that ranged across a lifetime of shared experiences. Their 50th wedding anniversary in 1935 was marked with another large celebration. All their children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends old and new. Grant, now 79, moved carefully, but his mind was sharp and his love for Olivia undimmed. Olivia, 74, had silver hair and wrinkles earned through years of laughter and tears, and she had never felt more beautiful because of how Grant still looked at her. They renewed their vows at the same church where they had married 5 decades earlier. Standing before their family, they repeated the promises they had made so long ago, and when Grant slipped the ring onto her finger once more, his hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. "I would do it all again," he said, departing from the traditional words. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Olivia responded, tears streaming down her face. "Forever and always I would choose you." The party afterward was joyous and exhausting. The younger grandchildren ran wild while the adults visited and reminisced. Photographs were taken, preserving the moment for future generations. As the sun set and people began to leave, Olivia and Grant found themselves alone on the porch once more, sitting in the same spot where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. 50 years, Olivia marveled. Half a century since you found me crying on that bench and offered me a job. Best decision I ever made, Grant said, taking her hand. Though I had no idea that day how completely you would change my life. We changed each other's lives, Olivia corrected gently. That is what true partnership means. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one over the prairie that had been their home for so long. The ranch buildings spread out before them, the land they had worked and loved, the legacy they were leaving to their children and grandchildren. It was not the life either of them had expected, but it was more than either had dared to hope for. Grant passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1937, at age 81. Olivia woke one morning to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, his suffering ended. The grief was crushing, a physical pain that seemed to hollow her out from the inside. They had been partners for 52 years, together through every challenge and triumph, and his absence left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. But as she sat at his funeral, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by the ranch hands and townspeople whose lives he had touched, she realized that Grant lived on in everything they had built together, in the ranch that still thrived under James's management, in Catherine's novels that carried forward Olivia's legacy, in the 8 grandchildren who carried his name and his values, in the stories that would be told and retold, keeping his memory alive. Olivia remained on the ranch, unable to imagine living anywhere else. She continued writing, completing 2 more novels that reflected her perspective on love, loss, and the endurance of the human spirit. Her grandchildren visited frequently, and she took joy in sharing stories of their grandfather, ensuring they understood the kind of man he had been. She lived to be 92 years old, dying peacefully in the summer of 1953 in the house she and Grant had shared for nearly 7 decades. Her children and grandchildren were with her at the end, and her final words were about Grant, about how she could feel him waiting for her, about how she was ready to be with him again. They buried her beside Grant in the Wilson Cemetery, beneath trees they had planted decades earlier. The headstone was simple but perfect, bearing both their names and a single line that Catherine had composed. 2 hearts found home together. The ranch continued under family management, passing from generation to generation, and the stories of Olivia and Grant became family legend. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing about the woman from Boston, who came west with nothing, and the romantic cowboy, who showed her that fairy tales can come true, about how they built a legacy of love and partnership that endured long after they were gone. And in the evenings, when the wind whispered across the Kansas prairie, carrying the scent of grass and horses and endless sky, sometimes it seemed like you could still hear them there on the porch, talking and laughing, bound together by a love that proved stronger than time, deeper than circumstance, and more enduring than any story ever written. Because this was not just a story, it was real. It happened. And it mattered, not because it was dramatic or extraordinary, but because it was true, built moment by moment, choice by choice, day by day, until it became something beautiful and lasting and worthy of remembrance. The novels Olivia wrote remained in print, discovered by new generations of readers who responded to her authentic voice and heartfelt stories. Catherine became an accomplished author in her own right, expanding on her mother's themes while developing her own style. The Brennan Ranch remained successful, adapting to changing times while maintaining the values Grant and Olivia had established. In the town of Wilson, a small museum eventually opened celebrating local history, and one entire room was dedicated to Olivia Brennan, the acclaimed author who had made her home there. Her novels were displayed alongside photographs of the ranch, letters between her and her publishers, personal items that told the story of her remarkable life. Visitors came from across the country to learn about this woman who had arrived penniless in 1884 and had built something extraordinary. But the real legacy was not in museums or books. It was in the family that continued to gather at the ranch every summer, multiple generations coming together to remember and celebrate where they came from. It was in the stories passed down, embellished and refined with each telling, about the unlikely meeting and beautiful partnership that had started it all. It was in the values of hard work, partnership, education, and love that became the foundation of how the family understood itself. The house itself was maintained carefully, preserved by each generation as a tangible link to Olivia and Grant. The library still held her original books, her desk, where she had written her novels. The porch where they had spent countless evenings was rebuilt exactly as it had been when necessary repairs were needed. The land itself, the rolling prairie and endless sky, remained much as it had been when Olivia first saw it in 1884, a testament to the timeless beauty that had captured her heart. Historians eventually discovered Olivia's journals, which Catherine had carefully preserved. They provided intimate glimpses into her thoughts and feelings, her struggles and triumphs, the reality of life as a woman in the late 19th and early 20th century American West. Academic papers were written analyzing her novels in the context of her lived experience. She became a subject of study, an example of how women navigated the constraints and opportunities of their time. But beyond the academic interest, beyond the museum displays and historical papers, what mattered most was the simple, profound truth at the heart of Olivia and Grant's story. That love can flourish in unexpected places, that partnership built on respect and genuine affection can weather any storm, and that happy endings are not just the stuff of fiction, but can be actively created by people brave enough to take chances and wise enough to nurture what they find. Their story was proof that fairy tales can come true, not through magic or destiny, but through choice and commitment, through showing up day after day and choosing each other again and again. It was proof that the best love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about the quiet moments, the shared work, the laughter and tears and everything in between that builds a life together. And so the story of Olivia and Grant Brennan lived on, retold and remembered, inspiring new generations to believe that love is possible, that partnership matters, that taking chances can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Their legacy was not just in property or publications, but in the example they set, in the proof they provided that ordinary people can create extraordinary lives if they are brave enough to embrace possibility and wise enough to recognize love when it finds them. In the end, Olivia had been right about one thing and wrong about another. She had been wrong when she believed love was only in stories, that real life could not contain the kind of romance she read about in novels. Grant had proven her gloriously wrong, showing her that fairy tales can come true out west, that real love is even better than fictional love because it is earned and chosen and built through years of partnership. But she had been right about the power of stories themselves. Because their story, the one they lived together, became a story worth telling, worth preserving, worth passing down through generations as proof of what is possible when two people find each other and have the courage to build something beautiful together. It was a story that honored the Wild West not as a place of violence and lawlessness, but as a place where people could reinvent themselves, where love could flourish despite hardship, where families could be built and legacies created that would endure for generations. And that story, their story, the story of how a desperate woman from Boston and a kind cowboy from Kansas found each other and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, remained alive in the hearts and memories of everyone who heard it, a testament to the enduring power of love, partnership, and the belief that fairy tales can come true if you are brave enough to live them.